I'd like to welcome everybody to our presentation on E911 compliance and remote worker solutions and how they are impacting the compliance issues for companies. And our guest presenter is Kevin Keto, and Kevin is the CEO of 911 Secure. 911 Secure developed the Avaya SENTRY solution in conjunction with Avaya, and it is truly a next generation product because a lot of the functionality it offers is different and there's no other competition in the marketplace offering exactly the same solution set. So what we wanted to do is do a dive in and talk more about remote worker scenarios and what the impact is going to be on the 911 legislation and the current laws. My name is Larry Carlson. I'm a Director of Marketing for Altura. And with that, Kevin, I wanted to introduce you, and I really appreciate your time and look forward to your presentation on Avaya SENTRY and remote worker compliance issues for E911.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Larry. I'm excited to be able to talk about this because, like we were talking before, this is something that kind of people start to forget about or don't even think about when they're starting to put people working from home, or they say, you know what, don't use your phone to dial 911. Those are not really solutions. So we have some pretty cool solutions that we're going to talk about today.
So part of that is the legislation that's been enacted and some of the legislation that's going to be coming up. And you're going to talk about that now, I guess, right?
Oh, went a little bit too far. Yeah, so one of the things is you can go to our website, 911secure.com/911-legislation, and it has the actual Kerry's Law legislation and the Ray-Bombs Act legislation. And then also it goes state by state. Not every state has its own E911 legislation, but the ones that do, we have like a little synopsis of what it is and the links to those laws as well. So just so that we're all on the same page, Kerry's Law was actually signed into law February 16th of 2018, and it had three requirements, or it has three requirements. One is direct access to 911, meaning that if you dial 911, you don't have to dial any kind of an access line. They kind of talk about it as no 9 needed. And that this is just programming in the PBX. You know, there's nothing that we do or anything. It's just programming. All PBXs should be able to do that. The second one is direct routing to the PSAP. And what does that actually mean? It means that the call needs to be answered by the 911 operator. Okay, meaning that we don't want those calls to be answered by like a front desk or on-site security. We see this a lot with hospitals, sometimes with universities, where they have those calls route to something other than the local public safety answer point, and so Kerry's Law doesn't want that to happen anymore. And then the last one is on-site notification, and that's where our solution can come in and help to make sure that companies are compliant with the law. And we do it via our Beacon Screen Pop. We have this client that runs on workstations, and it can be like the front desk or on-site security can receive that. And it happens immediately when somebody dials 911. It'll pop up. There's lights flashing. There's an annoying noise coming from the speakers. And not only does it tell you that somebody dialed 911, but it can also give them the specific location information of where that call is coming from. And, you know, we forgot to mention up at the top, if you do have any questions, I think that there's a question panel on the right-hand side. If you do have something that pops up, please feel free to type your questions in there, and we'll either answer them as we're going or maybe wrap them up at the end.
Yeah, any questions, if we do that by chat, we'll be able to answer those. One of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about is, so Kerry's Law is in effect right now. As of last February, it's a mandate, and people say, well, what does that mean? Well, this is a federal law now, and what that means is if you're violating this federal law, you have to deal with the federal government, not a state government or not a $500 civil fine. I mean, there are major lawsuits that can result in any violations, and you're dealing with the feds now. Yeah. So a lot of states have put certain laws in the books that says, oh, there's going to be a $500 fine if you violate this, and they've moved their dates out for compliance. This is a law right now that if you're not in compliance with, you're putting your company in jeopardy. And, you know, folks don't want to hear that, but that's a reality.
Sure,
so
sure.
Now with the new laws coming up, we wanted to talk about the Ray-Bomb Act because that isn't getting a lot of attention, and this is something important that we need to prepare for because next January is going to have a whole new set of restrictions. And could you cover that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Kevin?
so you're exactly right. With Kerry's law, you need to be in compliant with it now, because when it was signed into law in 2018, but they basically gave companies a 2-year window to be able to get themselves compliant with it. Ray Baum's Act doesn't have that same kind of grace period. I mean, I guess it kind of does. It was signed into law in August of last year, and so they gave companies a little bit over a year, almost a year and a half. And the first deadline is January 6th of 2021 for fixed phones. And then the next one is January 6th of 2022 for non-fixed. And it only has one requirement, and that is to provide dispatchable location. And this is something that companies can't really do on their own. Kerry's law, there's ways that you can pass Kerry's law. We say, you can get a D- in the class by barely doing it with some of the things that the PBXs can offer. But with Ray Baum's Act, you do need to have some other third-party solution, whether it's something that you set up a PSAPs agreement with your dial tone provider, or use a solution like ours to be able to make sure that you are compliant. What dispatchable location means is when the call gets to the public safety answer point, they receive 2 address lines. Address line 1 is just the address, 123 Main Street. And then address line 2 is that additional information. And you could put in there like the gate information, building, entrance, floor. Those are the typical things that we put in there. They haven't defined exactly what you put in there. They gave some suggestions in the law, but really it's more about common sense. And that's a good thing, because not all companies are created equal. Gate information might be vital for one company, and it may be completely irrelevant to another. All right. So this slide here talks about our solution and the way that we handle routing of 911 calls to the correct servicing 911 center. So in the middle there, you have the phone system, and you have calls routing to our cloud. And whenever a call comes to our cloud, we will route the call to the correct servicing 911 center based on the caller ID and the location information that we have set to that caller ID. So if you have a site and your main site's in Los Angeles, that call comes to our cloud, we'll route that call to the Los Angeles 911 center. If you have a remote site in New York, it can come back to the same PBX in Los Angeles, and we can still route that call to the correct New York PSAP. And then the biggest thing, the thing that we're going to be talking about today mostly, is those people who are working remote. All those remote workers who, they don't really realize that they shouldn't be dialing 911, or maybe they were told don't dial 911. But the one thing is, the person who's working from home, maybe it's not the person who's actually dialing 911, especially if it's like a VPN hard phone. It could be somebody else in the house who is dialing who needs to dial 911. And so we have ways to make it so that we can route the call to the correct 911 center and deliver the home address of where that person's at. Or if they leave, say they have a soft phone on a laptop, they wanted to go to a friend's house, or maybe they're social distancing, or they're able to go to the local Starbucks, once COVID passes us by, hopefully, and they have to have some way of updating their location information. And the way that we do that is with our Gatekeeper product. Okay. All right. So Gatekeeper right here, this is, if you slow it just a little bit, yeah, there we go. So this first slide that you see here on the right-hand side is Gatekeeper. And this is the application that actually gets loaded onto the laptop. And the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to put their name in, or maybe an agent ID and the phone number of their soft phone. And then they're going to hit the set button. And then they're going to get that little prompt in the bottom right-hand corner where it says location update detected, basically telling them you need to update your location information because there's no location information provisioned. So once they do hit the set button, it'll take them to the next screen, which will show them places where they can update their location. So yeah, if you want to go to one more time. Yeah, so this is actually my personal one. And so I have a whole bunch of old saved addresses on here because I've been using this for a long time. And so for me, I can just click on one of those check marks, and it'll update my address in near real time. It takes like maybe a second to get updated to the system. Or if they say they've never been there before, it's the first time they use it, they can click the little plus button in the bottom left-hand corner and manually type their address information in. Or what most people do is they'll just click on the Find Me on the Map little blue button there in the middle of the screen, and it will geolocate where the user's at. So this is geolocated that they're at the Waldorf Astoria or Beverly Hills. So they're at the hotel in Beverly Hills, and it says here, we found you here, and this is the address information that we have on you. And so the user can just click on the check mark and say, yep, that's where I'm at. Or especially when they're in a hotel, or say they're in an apartment building, they can further refine their address by clicking on the little pencil. So if you click on the pencil there, Larry, it'll pull up a place where you can type in additional information, that address line 2 information. So here it says floor 2, room 202, They click the validate button, and then once they do that, now their location information is provisioned, and if they make a 911 call, they're going to get the address of the Waldorf Astoria, and they're going to get that they're on the second floor in room 202. So this is something that is really been needed, a tool that is not only easy to use, and we feel like having that Find Me on the Map feature is really the thing that makes this the easy, it's like the easy button, right? To be able to make it so that they can update their location information. But the other part of this is, the way that it triggers somebody to update their location information is whenever they leave, like they say they're at home and they do in a non-COVID world, they go to Starbucks, it'll see that they're connected to the internet via a different IP address. And then it deprovisions whatever address information is set in the system, and then it prompts them, hey, update your location information. And it will continue to nag them until they do actually update their location information. So we've seen a great mass adoption of these people being able to actually update their location information rather than just leaving it blank or something like that.
So is it true to say then with Gatekeeper, for having the concerns of having remote workers, that this is a built-in safeguard to remind people how important it is to keep their location updated?
Absolutely. It's kind of like, we say it's like that constant reminder for the user to update their location information. And if they're just working from home, they actually will only have to do it once. It's not like they're being prompted every single time they open their computer. It's literally only when they move. If they go from one place to another, that's when it's going to update or ask them for an updated location information.
Is there a difference in how Gatekeeper works, considering that some folks are using VPN phones and other folks are using maybe soft phones? Is there a difference?
So in a way, so if a person is using a soft phone on a laptop, we just load Gatekeeper directly on that laptop, and then whenever that person moves, they update their location information. And then the way that their location information is associated with their soft phone is by their phone number, whatever phone number they enter in the system. So it doesn't actually directly interact with the soft phone application, which is great because it's completely PBX and application agnostic. Even though we have a lot of stuff that works really well with Avaya, this is a part of our solution that is completely PBX agnostic, and it doesn't matter what the person's using. For people who are using VPN hard phones from home, you could still load this on their Gatekeeper, and then whenever they move, they could update their location information. I mean, literally move, like they move from one apartment to another or from one house to another, and then it can prompt them once they do move. But what we see with most people who are using VPN hard phones is the administrator back at headquarters will be the one who manages their location. And when we go to the next slide, you'll see our dispatcher product. This is where people can, the administrator actually can update location information. So you can see the first line item there. It's somebody who has a source of Gatekeeper, and that means that's where the location information is housed. And so you can say, hey, is this person, who's updated their location information and who hasn't? So you can check and double check to say, hey, how many people are updating their location information? And this particular user has no address validated in the system. So if they were to make a 911 call, the call would not route directly to the correct servicing 911 center. So you can proactively reach out to them and say, hey, you need to update your location information. But one of the other things is the second line item, that's a source of dispatcher. This is where somebody has a VPN hard phone and we're manually typing their address information in their form. So if you click through this, I think this is a little bit of a build slide. You can kind of see that administrators can review all DIDs and ELINs. If the user's failed to provision, there's that little check there, exclamation point to let you know. And you can sort each one of these columns to see who has provisioned or validated or a name. You can also, up in the upper kind of right-hand corner, it says filter. You can just manually type an address or phone number in and pull up a particular user if you want to. And so this makes it a little bit easier for the administrators to see who's using the application, who's not.
So in terms of knowing the address of the remote employee, that's the critical piece.
Yes.
And the administrator for each company has almost like an insurance policy because the tools with Dispatcher and SENTRY help make it easier to manage. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then also the double check, right? You can actually literally see, has somebody updated their location information? Or because like I was saying, it won't, like this person who's the unprovisioned example, the name there at the top, if they were to dial 911, those calls would route to what's called the Emergency Call Response Center. And there somebody talks to the person, finds out where they're at, and then they manually route that call to the correct servicing 911 center. So it's a backup just in case they messed up or they didn't have a validated address, But the problem with that, there's a hefty charge for every single time somebody routes a call there, because that's not our call center. It's like where basically all rogue 911 calls go to, and it's the backup system if there was just no address information associated with the phone number.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. So everything that we've talked about up until now, we talked about those remote workers, and the top line there is what's called an E911 call, or an enhanced 911 call, where we take the call and we route that call to the correct servicing 911 center. And this solution's been around for many, many years. But what I also wanted to talk about today and touch on is our next generation, or NG 911 solution. And so this is one thing that's really unique to our solution, where we can take a lot of the data that a customer has about their users and about their site and throw that into the RapidSOS clearinghouse. So first, I'm going to talk about what happens for people who are, in the corporate environment, and then we'll talk about how remote workers are affected by this. So go back real quick. If you look at the bottom there, there's some of the additional data that some of our customers are pushing to the PSAP, but it's not limited to this. Literally almost anything that you want to put in there, you can add, and the PSAP can have access to this. We've seen some customers who put like where the gurney-capable elevator is, literally a picture of the front of the building, just so the PSAP, they can actually even push that out to the field. And so the ability for us to be able to do that for the corporate sites is game-changing, because nobody else in the world was able to do this. And we were the first company. We did this first NG911 call at the beginning of last year in conjunction with our partner RapidSOS. But for people who are working remotely, if they wanted to, they could add personal information. I think about my sister a lot because she works from home and she's diabetic. And that would be very good information for the 911 operator to be able to receive on the call. Like if she were to dial 911, because there's lots of times where she actually has had reactions where she's able to call us or call another family member, but she's not able to articulate what's going on. And when we start to hear the slurred speech, we already know what's going on. So we get somebody over there, and somebody gets some of her sugar. And so this would be great if she could dial 911, because right now where she's living, there's no family around her. If she were to dial 911, and they could pop up on their screen that this person is diabetic, that would be the great information for the PSAP operator to be able to have.
So RapidSOS is a clearinghouse. Is that entity working with any of the E911 providers that you're aware of?
So, I mean, there's some things that they do with some other companies, but as far as the way that we do things, I'm not aware of anything. And just so that we have a clear understanding of who RapidSOS is, they're a completely separate company, and they came about because of cell phone calls. Somebody makes a 911 call from a cell phone, the 911 operator's information that they would receive at the PSAP level was terrible. It was like a 100-yard radius. That was usually the best case scenario. And they said, your phone knows exactly where you are. Why can't we take that location payload and provide that to the 911 operator? I mean, they can go down to like a 3-foot radius. And so they were able to reach out to Apple and Google and talk to them about, hey, can we take that location information, you give it to us, and then we can provide it to the PSAP. So that's when it first started. And we were introduced to RapidSOS, and we said, you know what, this is just a clearinghouse. Why can't we take that data that's on the customer site and throw it into that clearinghouse? And so that's how we're able to do NG911 without doing it the way that it was first conceived. Because when they first conceived NG911, they were talking about the customer would have to be SIP, the infrastructure would have to be SIP, the PSAP would have to be able to receive calls via SIP, and if anywhere along the line it wasn't SIP all the way throughout, you weren't able to get that NG911 information to the PSAP. So now we're able to do this, and it doesn't matter that this. And by the way, this covers about 90% of the population. So it's not available everywhere, but 90% of the U.S. is covered with this solution. All right. So this is my favorite slide to talk about. I get excited whenever I see our testing solution. So before we had our 933 test service, if somebody were to wanted to make a 911 call, or wanted to check, to see, I can see I'm getting really excited, Larry. If somebody wanted to check to see if the system was working correctly, they literally just had to dial 911 and then talk to the 911 operator and say, what do you see on your screen? And sometimes those calls went really well. Other times it didn't go so well, where the 911 operator would either get upset or the PSAP would have certain fines sometimes. They said they don't allow testing. Or sometimes if you did call like the admin line, they would say you're only allowed to test between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. Some cities actually have that because they don't want to be wasting time doing testing when they could be dealing with an actual emergency. And so the 933 test service, when somebody dials 933, when that call comes to the cloud, rather than us routing it all the way to the PSAP, we route that to, we call it a PSAP simulator. And you hear the audio recording readback of the phone number and the location information that would have been presented to the PSAP. So it's a great way to do testing without having to bother anybody. You can do it as much as you want. There's literally no cost involved. You don't have to set up appointments. You can even have your users dial 933. So if you know those people who are working remotely, if you wanted to say, hey, you know what, after you do this, if you want to check to see if everything is provisioned correctly, dial 933 to give that extra level of confidence that everything is working correctly.
Right. This whole conversation about remote workers and why there's additional concern, the concern is not just about the remote worker, the employee making the phone calls.
Exactly. That's
in a home environment, when you know we have COVID, we have security issues. Some people feel like we have so many things going around with us. This fear of the unknown. We live in a trying time right now. There's just a lot of stress and everyone has a lot of issues going on. If we can minimize that stress using technology, we're seeing that with COVID and how our first responders and our healthcare heroes are helping everyone, but also how companies have enabled their employees to be productive and stay in business and service customers. This is a different world. If you're in an environment where you can control the environment and make it safer for your employees, why wouldn't you do it? And any home worker or remote employee that has children, and those children can't be watched 100% of the time, we know that. If there was an emergency and the child is trained to use the phone and dial 911 to get help, does it matter what device or what phone they're using if they're doing what they were told? And if we're in a situation to control that and help that with the next generation solution, the whole idea is to be compliant and doing the right thing for those folks that work with us. That's what this conversation is about and why we wanted to kind of touch base and say, hey, these are matters that are going to be important anyway. Why not go with something that's going to make the most sense and be available? And it is right now, and it will keep you compliant.
Yeah,
so
and that's a great point, Larry, because, you know, back when I first started doing this, there were people who had home phones. Right now, people basically just have their cell phones, right? And so I think, and I mentioned my sister before, this is, 911 calls in particular are pretty near and dear to my heart because my nephew, who's actually in his 20s now, when he was, I think about right around 2 years old, he actually dialed 911 for my sister from home. They had a home phone back then, and we played this game with him. If mommy does this, go over and pick up this phone, dial 911, and we give him a cookie, and then he'd do it. We would just play this game over and over and over with them. And there was this one particular time where she was home alone with him on a Friday morning, I think it was, and he picked up the phone, dialed 911 because mommy had passed out in the kitchen, and police, fire, and ambulance were able to get there and help her out. And it's like you could imagine, like it's like okay, people have a VPN hard phone at home. Say she was an at-home worker at the time. And we said, okay, Jeremy, you can use any phone in the house except for this one, not this one right here. And so that's something that I think about all the time, about what situation could have been different if he would have picked up a phone that displayed the wrong address. Because if you don't have a solution like this, like ours in place, the 911 operator is going to receive the corporate address, and that could be in a different state even. And we have lots of customers who have a core in one part of the country, and then they have remote workers all over the country. And we really want to make sure that the calls get routed to the right place and give the right location information.
A couple questions, Kevin. Do we still need gatekeeper if none of our employees use soft phones on their laptops?
No, you wouldn't, because going back to dispatcher, those people, you would just upload those phone numbers yourself. One thing we do say, though, is it's kind of a good backup to have. If those people are going to be working from home kind of on a semi-permanent basis, you can still load Gatekeeper onto their desktops, because we see that actually a lot where they've set up a client or an at-home worker with an actual desktop rather than a laptop. And so you can put it on there, and it's just kind of sitting there in the background as a backup. And the only time it's going to fire is if somebody literally moves. Right? They're going from they're moving from one house to another house, and then their IP address is going to change, and then it'll prompt them to update their location information.
We have another question that is a conversation regarding is the 911 secure SENTRY solution a variation or similar to Intrado?
Yeah, so similarly, yeah, I mean, Intrado/West, they have solutions that are similar to us. There's some things that we obviously do a little bit differently with our Gatekeeper and our NG911 solutions, but yeah, it's similar to that.
Okay. So in terms of a general comparison, no other companies are using Next-Gen 911 in terms of defining their solution or what have you. What are the pros and cons in terms of pricing the SENTRY solution compared to some of the traditional E911 solutions? Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I actually do. And so the way that we charge for our solution is based on the number of what we call them reporting zones. So this is especially prevalent when it comes to people who are working in the office. So you could have, say, a 10-story building that has 5,000 phones in it. But if you only want to report to maybe four zones on each floor, that turns into 40 zones. They have 5,000 phones. There's no reason to charge them 5,000 times when you're only going to be reporting 40 different zones. So the way that the big cost difference there is, you want to be charged 5,000 times and report 40 zones, or do you want to be charged 40 times and have 40 reporting zones? I think the answer is pretty clear, and that's the way that we do our solution.
Okay. In terms of remote workers, we don't see a lot of organizations really making changes like doing away with remote worker scenarios. Are there any advances that are forthcoming or any new features in the technology that you could give us a hint on, any improvements that you see coming?
So yeah, there's a couple of things that we're going to be improving Gatekeeper on, because Gatekeeper is, I don't know what iteration of Gatekeeper it is, but the first time it was conceived, it was basically the user had to bookmark a URL. And then in order for them to update their location information, whenever they moved, they had to remember to go into this URL. And it was just a long, drawn-out process. And we've gotten to the point where Gatekeeper is very, very almost close to automatic. And that's the next thing that we're going to be developing. It's hopefully going to be available sometime next year. But it's more to be able to say, hey, I've been here before, and to be able to just recognize, hey, I've been here before, and automatically set the person's address. And then it just tells them, hey, this is where your address information is set, and you're good to go. So you don't have to worry about resetting your address at all.
Another question. I have a remote VoIP phone in my home office, and it's a bridged appearance of my office desk phone. I also have a soft phone on my laptop using the same desk number. If I enter my home information for my home office phone and I dial 911 from my office phone at work, will the home information show?
So no, and actually, if you want to click onto the next slide, this is be a good illustration of how that is dealt with. So when you're external, you use your own individual phone number. That's going to be loaded into our database. And our SENTRY software will see that you are remote, and it's going to put you in what's called undiscovered mode. And when you're in undiscovered mode, it uses your actual phone number as your caller ID. So it says, oh, this person's remote. I need to make sure I use that. When they're internal, we do what's called an Elin-Earl model. So kind of like what I was talking about earlier with that 5-story building, this particular floor has been broken down into 5 different zones. And so when they're in one of those zones, our software will see them, we'll put it in discovered mode, and then it will make sure that it outpulses the ELIN, which stands for Emergency Location Identification Number. It's just a fancy term for a phone number that has been associated with the zone that they're in. So if somebody's in the yellow zone, they're going to outpulse a full 10-digit phone number that ends in 4351. If they're in the purple zone, they're going to outpulse the 4355 number. So that's the way that we're able to have 2 distinct addresses for the exact same phone number. Because again, when they're internal, they don't use it. When they're external, they do use it.
Very good. Mm-hmm. Any closing thoughts that you want to mention?
So, this is the thing. I think we mentioned it at the top, maybe before some people joined. I've been doing this for 15 years, and the biggest competitor that we have is nothing. And there's been too many times to count where I've put out proposals to companies, and they say, we're not going to do anything right now. We're going to put it on next year's budget or whatever. And hopefully, the issue of, with Ray Baum's Act coming up, especially, hopefully that'll get companies to really say, no, we need to put money into this. Because there's been so many times when I get those terrible phone calls where they say, something bad happened and we need to implement a solution tomorrow. I mean, this happened like in the first 6 months that I was doing this 15 years ago. And so I always think about that. I was like, gosh, what could I have done better to get them to do something, right? And that's the thing that's scary about this is there's a way to solve this problem, and it doesn't have to be a crazy $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 endeavor. We can do this for as little cost as possible. That's what we try and do. We want to try and make this as low cost to the customer as we possibly can, while still delivering a very robust, fully formed solution.
Very good. Everyone, we appreciate your time. If you have any questions about the status of remote worker support, and how the E911 compliance affects your company, please reach out to your account manager at Altura, and we'll be happy to set up a follow-up call with Kevin and his team. We appreciate your time today. Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Larry.